There's an annoying tendency today to try and read big meaningful truths into things like sales figures, ratings, and box office numbers when it comes to media, a kind of diseased fusion of the capitalist ideal of the market and profitability therein being the one true arbiter of success and the social media-driven news scene's desperate need for instant reactions and so-called hot takes, i.e. one movie or TV show winning by selling the most tickets or pulling the most ratings, gives one a quick semblance of came, saw, conquered storyline to report on without having to deal with a lot of time-consuming legwork or really any work figuring one out. Case in point, in the lead-up to last weekend's new release movies at the US box office, a ton of ink was spilled based on projections that the brutally violent yet exceptionally well-reviewed action feature Mad Max Fury Road would actually come in second place versus Pitch Perfect 2, a low-budget comedy sequel about a group of young women competing in a singing contest. The so-called hot take on this came largely in the form of celebrating demographic shifts in moviegoing and the consumption of popular culture potentially creating greater diversity in terms of content. See, summer blockbusters have for the last 4 decades or so been predominantly the province of action films perceived to be targeted mainly at young male audiences, with the amount of money such films make both on their own and through ancillary merchandising effectively crowding out other types of films and other types of audiences. The idea that a massively hyped big-budget blood-and-guts car stunts action could be outdrawn by a peppy musical comedy aimed almost exclusively at young women then would suggest that the market was moving in a direction where films that weren't primarily about gasoline explosions and macho heroics might have an even shot to succeed and welcome a more diverse audience to the summer movie party scene. And okay, that's a fairly cogent narrative if you're into such things, though it does rely on ignoring mitigating factors like Mad Max series not really having been as consistently popular between sequels as, say, Star Wars, and the fact that being R-rated means that many audiences who might have wanted to see Fury Road wouldn't have been able to, which is why almost no big movies are rated R anymore, and yet that narrative sort of ran into a brick wall otherwise once people actually started getting to see the films. And whereas the inevitable box office topper Pitch Perfect 2 found its quote-unquote progressive bona fides, r.e. being a uplifting story about young women made by a female director, called into question because of what some saw as an over-reliance on fat jokes, racial stereotypes, and other decidedly retrograde forms of punching down humor. Whereas Mad Max caught blowback of an entirely different kind. The notorious anti-woman hate site Return of Kings published a laughable but instantly viral takedown of the yet unseen film, which it declared to be feminist propaganda because the plot appeared to involve Mad Max teaming up with an equivalent female post-apocalyptic warrior to rescue a group of female sex slaves from a repugnant male villain. I'd hate to know what these clowns think of the first act of Return of the Jedi. But when the film actually came out, it turned out the bad guys were right. Sort of. Not only does the film feature Charlize Theron as a character who's actually much more so the hero than Mad Max is, the other heroes are a tribe of conservationist warrior women, while the villains are a death cult built around the revived vestiges of masculine honor culture, a literal patriarchy, with the film's implicit message genuinely seeming to be that it was blustering, domineering macho daddy figures like the evil Immortan Joe that destroyed the world in the first place, and that redemption lies in the opposite direction under Theron's Imperator Furiosa. Now, being aggressively anti-masculinist isn't necessarily the same thing as being feminist. Huh, weird. That sounded like a comment section going straight to hell. But the film's blunt themes of patriarchal power structure as alternately obsolete, innately toxic, or simply too easily corruptive, along with the presence of a decidedly unconventional female lead as its heroine, clearly registered strongly in that regard. The film has been lauded in both the mainstream media and social activism outlets for its strong heroine and roundly referred to as a feminist action movie, a pairing of words you don't often see unless Uma Thurman is swinging a samurai sword around. Now, how about that? Between an apocalyptic car chase and a girl power sing-off, the one getting touted as the new face of female empowerment is the one with a flamethrower guitar truck? That's unexpected. Not that there wasn't some dissent from that view, most prominently coming from feminist media criticism duo of Jonathan McIntosh and Anita Sarkeesian. Okay, that's twice now? Whatever. Who posited that despite its female-forward messaging, Mad Max couldn't truly be called feminist because it still presented a narrative of victory through force and violence in a positive light, and many feel that the idea of beneficial violence is a creation of male-dominated social structures historically. Now, I don't agree with that particular reading for a number of reasons. Binary gender is largely itself a social construct, violence appears to be an innate trait among most living things to one degree or another, but I don't think it's an entirely unreasonable position. I mean, it's a lot more cats over dogs than jet fuel can't melt steel beams, as controversial statements go, but the resulting dialogue managed to land the film and the omnipresent Sarkeesian. Okay.
It's showtime.
Into an entirely new swirling debate over just who gets to define what is and isn't empowering, which is cresting just in time to be overtaken by hand-wringing over whether or not Tomorrowland is another Brad Bird movie, where the message boils down to the softball objectivism of get out of the way and let the special people be special, with both still competing for eyeballs with Avengers Age of Hey, this one's all about drone warfare, and eventually Jurassic World warning us about the dangers of unregulated scientific tampering for a 4th time. It's enough to make you yearn for the good old days, the simpler time, when action movies were about simpler things, like, the need to abandon national borders and act in a spirit of geopolitical cooperation to a common good, or the arbitrary lines drawn between the haves and have-nots. Huh. You know, it's funny. I said at the outset I don't really want to do politics on this show, and seriously, if you see me doing election coverage here, hit me with something heavy. But those events I just recounted illustrate a point that's especially prevalent in the so-called nerd culture. What we commonly call politics is mainly the commodification of ideas, themes, and discussion-worthy topics into things to divide up and vote about. As such, the seemingly reasonable call to keep politics out of movies, video games, whatever, is actually kind of impossible, because politics is just another form ideas can take, and ideas are in pretty much everything. And that's good, because otherwise everything would be boring. I mean, take out the civil rights metaphor, and the X-Men are just a bunch of guys in weird tights. If you take out the Kennedy-era exploration boosting, Star Trek would be also just another bunch of guys in weird tights, but in space. Star Wars could only have existed as a reaction to the Vietnam War angst. E.T. is about a kid accepting and moving on from divorce. Legend of Zelda games routinely posit wisdom, courage, and power as strengths analogous to elite heroism, commoner heroism, and villainy. That's not just politics, that's practically a philosophy. As is with great power comes great responsibility, by the way. And that's just a handful. So while I get sick of people trying to read stuff into popular culture that just isn't there, we should celebrate the stuff that is there. It makes for a richer, more nuanced, and long-lasting experience. I mean, did anyone expect the most talked-about blockbuster of summer to end up being a 3 decades later revival of Mad Max?